Well, as you might expect, early on in this work of racial justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in our district, we have had many educators ask us the question, how do I deal with a text that contains derogatory language about a racial or cultural group? Well, today we are going to explore that question with the help of a group of educators in our district. Joining us is Anna Ponce, social studies teacher at St. Francis High School, and Heather Saunders, diverse learning coordinating teacher at St. Joan of Arc K-9 School. Really welcome the both of you. Thank you for taking the time to be with us and to help us really on this journey of becoming culturally responsive educators. It might be appropriate just to take a moment to introduce yourselves briefly about what brings you to this conversation. Maybe we'll begin with Anna.
Hi, everyone. So I guess what brings me here is this. I feel like this is my work every day in the classroom, especially teaching social studies. It's just something that you need to teach. Otherwise, I think you're missing a huge, huge aspect of social studies.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Heather. I am in my 31st year as an educator. And I think looking back at my 31 years, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about diversity. And I often wonder how much more is there for me to know? Lots and lots and lots. Currently a doctoral candidate as well, focusing on cultural responsiveness. And this is passion work for me. This is personal work for me. My 3 grandchildren are Black boys, and this is impactful. I see it in my schools. I see it everywhere I am. And this is something that I need to do.
Thank you, Heather. It's good to have both of you with us. And of course, we have alongside of them Matt Sawyer, racial JEDI consultant for learning and teaching, and Natando Lambati, community liaison worker for the district and part of our racial JEDI team. These sessions will focus on a real-life conversation or incident that occurred in our district. My colleagues here around this screen will help us unpack first the situation in a way that allows us to understand the social and cultural context more clearly. In other words, what's the story behind the story? I'll then ask them to identify what kind of culturally responsive tools we will need to effectively quote unquote, fix what went wrong in this situation. And then I'll invite them to model for us how we can apply these tools to the situation. And our aim, of course, is to help you become more confident in using these same tools in your classroom. So there are professional worksheets created specifically for each session. I invite you to take a moment, get those resources for this session in front of you. We'll be guiding you to them in different parts of this conversation. So go ahead and pause this video if you need to. And if you're listening to me right now, it means you're ready to get started. So Matt, the incident we're going to focus on today was a conversation you recently had with 2 teachers from the same school who wanted to use the same book in their classroom, but had 2 very different ideas about how to go about it. Now, I understand you're very familiar with this book. You've used this in your own classroom quite often. So give us a Coles Note version of what this book is about.
Yeah, the book's called Dear Martin, and it's written by Nick Stone, and it's a really popular book right now, ever since its inception. It's a fantastic novel. It's centered around the protagonist named Justice. He's a 17-year-old male, comes from a lower income neighborhood, and he attends a prestigious prep academy. So he's had to leave his neighborhood where he's most comfortable, where he's from, and attend an academy where he doesn't know many people originally. During the novel, he's subject to racial profiling. He struggles with his identity, like with knowing how to fit in. He kind of feels like he's caught between 2 worlds, right? He's at this prep academy where doesn't know anybody, and you know, he's one of very few Black students. But the neighborhood that he left, he's kind of seemed at times to be a sellout, somebody who's left his neighborhood to another. So he's very much caught between these two worlds. And so he's trying to find himself. And in his trying to find himself, he actually writes Martin Luther King letters. He writes Dr. Martin Luther King letters as a point of self-reflection. It's very cathartic for him to say, hey, Martin, how did you do this? How were you able to overcome the injustices and in the world and to find yourself? In the novel itself, though, the N-word's used a few times. Nick Stone is a Black author, and she's used the N-word very poignant times in the novel. They're not for shock value by any means. They're really to drive home different points. One time, for example, it's used by Justice's peer, a white student at a party, who in the end, the white student ends up getting punched for using the word. Another time it's used amongst Black youth, and then another time from what is a racist police officer. And so contextually, the word is used, you know, very, very differently as you go through the novel.
Matt, it's interesting, and we'll just use the name Miss Baker here for the teacher, because obviously the identity isn't as important, because I think we can all appreciate the question that are brought. Now that we understand that the N-word is in this text, tell us a little bit about the issue Miss Baker had in using this book in her class. Obviously, N-word is a sensitive word, but what particularly was Miss Baker kind of concerned with?
Miss Baker wanted to teach the text because it is a brilliant text to teach. It connects with kids. It's dealing with real issues of racism, systemic and on a personal level. It's dealing with self-reflection and identity. It really reaches kids. Kids love it, and that's really what we want to be doing. One of her struggles with teaching it, however, is the existence of the N-word within it. Understanding that the N-word itself can be triggering for students. And she struggled with including it, therefore, in her lessons, and also acknowledging her own place in this discussion of being a white lady who does not have the same lived experiences as many of her students do with the word. And it is important to note that her classroom is very diverse, students of all backgrounds, lots of Black students from different parts, from Africa, from the Caribbean, and some from here, born and raised in Canada, students, Filipino students, some Latino students, and some white students. And so her uncomfortability with teaching the word and also recognizing the potential triggers it may cause led her to not want to necessarily address it.
To that. So what did Miss Jones want to do?
Miss Jones wanted to talk about the N-word, to have a discussion about it in her class. Mm-hmm. She wanted to, now Miss Jones is also a white lady, and recognizing her own place within the word, with the word, and in the discussion of not having a personal necessarily relationship with it, she wanted to talk about it head on, so to speak. Also, not entirely certain how to do that per se, but wanting to not look past the word.
Well, let's move to the question, what's really going on? Identifying underlying issues and larger context through an equity lens. And we're going to come back to this comment that you made, Matt, regarding the teacher herself. Heather, what do you think, when you listen to this incident, what do you think Miss Baker is trying to avoid in her approach to this text? Could you kind of unpack that for us a little bit more?
Yeah. Well, without knowing Miss Baker, I would think that she is representative of a lot of the white teachers in our district right now. That discomfort, talking about something that we have been taught all of our white lives to avoid talking about. And now all of a sudden we're being asked to engage in a conversation about something that we know very little of. And I understand it's a, you know, in talking with other teachers, there is a physical response that people go through. They talk about their bodies when they start talking about race, when they talk about the N-word, how it manifests in sweating and shaking. And I think that's something that we don't want to dismiss. But as educators, as white people, it is our responsibility to, you know, move forward and recognize that race matters, words matter, educate ourselves, educate our students. And yeah, it is uncomfortable, but you know, it takes practice and people do become more comfortable, but avoiding it is certainly not the way to go.
Are teachers in the lower divisions even more sensitive about talking with kids about these kinds of topics such as race? Would that be a fair assessment as well in terms of some of that layer of anxiety that some teachers bring to this?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that it's, you know, central to elementary in our building. I do feel it's a pervasive feeling K-9. And I think it's just, you know, once we come together as a staff and talk about it, it makes a difference too, learning strategies from one another. But yeah, I'm not sure that it would just be an elementary issue in our building for sure.
I'm a huge believer that this isn't just taught in the classroom. Like we just don't, these aren't, teaching racial issues is not just something to plan for a class. It's something that we need to do ourselves. It's something that it's a journey, I think, that's personal as well, and it'll reflect in our professional practices. It's one that is ongoing. I'm still learning. I still stumble. Even though this is something that I've taught in my classrooms, I still get nervous. Like Heather said, there's a physical reaction when I teach something that is so sensitive, and I don't know how it's going to trigger the students. And I'm almost bracing myself for all the different conversations and reactions that could take place. But if I come from it from a place of vulnerability and a place of allyship and a place where I am learning with the kids, I think that's how I could set it up in the classroom.
I'm from Kenya, and in Kenya, we don't use the word. We hate music, and to us, we tend to think it means brotherhood, for those who would even dare want to know what it means. So when I came to Canada, I didn't know what the word meant. I thought it was just a normal word, just like any. And I realized that people are so sensitive when it's mentioned or when someone is called the word, but I didn't have that relationship with the word. So I wasn't sensitive. And sometimes I would wonder, like, why is somebody reacting? I mean, to just being called the N word, you know, is it really a big deal? And it's because I didn't have the information. I didn't have the knowledge. So if I was in a class of like the class for Miss Becker, it would have been a wonderful opportunity for the teacher to be able to bring that information even to us who don't have a relationship with the word.
Mm-hmm. So now let's help our those who have joined us, our listeners, identify one or two real practical tools that they need to effectively come into this situation again.
I think it's important that we as educators frame our classes knowing that these conversations are going to be needed, knowing that the text might not be studied for 3 months or in 2 months. But if we are able to frame our classes at the beginning with that, I mean, Anna used the word vulnerability, like showing our vulnerability and showing our openness to have real, honest conversations in our classes about anything. If we really set up a safe environment where kids are able to speak their truths, where we're able to really listen to one another and have some meaningful conversations that, you know, might go out, send us on tangents and lead us into it, the next day. If we're able to do that first, then when we're getting to having, you know, the need to have the harder conversations or the more courageous or challenging conversations, centered on the N-word or racial slurs, I think that alone allows the conversations to be easier, because we've already established this atmosphere within our classroom.
Well, I would echo Matt's sentiments about just creating that safe environment and connection before curriculum with all of your students. I think that's paramount, getting to know your audience and getting to know yourself and spending as much time with your students, having them ask you questions. I love Anna's talk about vulnerability. Those are key things that every educator should be willing to learn and be on this journey with their students. And I think, you know, people know this is something that we have to do, and equipping ourselves and taking those leaps of faith that we can do this as educators. We are professionals. Pedagogically, I always was taught that pedagogy is how you teach. Curriculum is what you teach. And I think this cultural responsiveness, you know, teaching our students, you know, with that whole diversity and inclusion and acceptance and getting rid of, you know, prejudice and racism. And these are the things that our pedagogy should be reflecting every day. And I think in order to do that, we really have to look at ourselves and discover our unconscious biases and that safe space that Matt was talking about in the classroom. That's important in our staff rooms too, to ask a colleague, you know, call me in when you hear me saying something that may be racist or is racist. Like, we have to lean on one another and really trust that we are moving forward together.
Just to piggyback off Matt's and Heather's idea of creating that safe space and connection, I'm a big believer that happens day one. That every single student in their lived experience and their opinions are to be respected. And that what we see in the classroom, whether it's 60 minutes, 75 minutes, 45 minutes, is just surface level. And we can't pretend that we know a person's lived experience, but we can at least appreciate and respect and give that student space to voice their opinions, to have their stories heard, and not to feel judged or to feel unsafe when they're sharing their stories. And so to add on to creating that safe space and to creating connections in the classroom, I think it's to give students a voice and to give them a very intentional platform where they can voice their opinions, their stories.
Yeah, I tend to think as an educator, you need to get some information, you know, to first to learn yourself. If you don't have the information, like if you've never experienced such a thing before, you know, we are there to help, but there are books which you can read, there are videos you can listen to, you can go to the our website and maybe click some videos and listen to. So the teacher or the educator should come having some knowledge of what that word means, you know, and build onto what the students are going to be talking about with their different experiences of the word. Because as I said, being a student who didn't know how hurtful the word is, I would loosely say it in class, and I would end up maybe being beaten by other students, and it becomes another issue in class. While maybe this should have been something which the teacher should have prepared the students by knowing your students. After listening to the stories, you get to know the climate of your class, so that when you come now to bring this discussion, you already know how this discussion can go, because you'll have already prepared the students. So the teacher needs to get some information about some, if it's like the N word, prior to even starting the conversation.
If we move now to kind of putting all of this together, this conversation, what would you do in this situation?
Having hopefully already built a safe space and a connection with the students where they feel like they can speak their truths, we would have early on in our discussions talked about, I use marginalized voices as a framework for a lot of my classes, but my class is set up in a space where we're having conversations about things that we usually don't have conversations about outside of our walls. And so in doing that, as we approach this text, we will have already done the work about the history. To Natando's point, I think we enter sometimes these spaces assuming that the kids know what the N-word means and where it comes from. But giving like the tangible, practical history as associated to American slavery and therefore the Black community being torn on the word and not off the assumption that the Black kids in the room are therefore the beholders of all information and knowledge as it pertains to any racialized topic, especially as it pertains to the N-word. But if we empower our students with that knowledge, then as we enter this text, I think it's before we talk about it, we'll still say, hey, the N-word's going to be, it's in this novel. When we get to it, obviously I'm not going to say it, we're not going to, right? But when we get to it, what I really want you to pay attention to is the context, is what's going on around this word that has evoked the word out in this character. Why did this character feel the need to say it? What happened thereafter, after the character said it? And that's where we'll do the work in my class, is the context, surrounding the context and the effects of that language. The word is it provides an opportunity to have a discussion. It provides context. It provides, so we're going to talk about that. And then when it happens again, we're going to do it again. And now we're going to compare those two situations. Because obviously, when we're talking about these things at the beginning of class or throughout the year, it's very theory. It's theory for kids. But when they see it in a novel and we can apply it to situations, we can really talk about, okay, now what does that look like in your life? Like, let's stop reading in the middle of page 37, in the middle of a sentence, right? Let's just stop and let's apply it to our world. Where do you see this? How does this, and let's have that discussion. And then we move on. But drawing attention to the context in the situation is more important than to the word. Because if we're bringing attention to the word, we're bringing attention to the word, and that is defeating our purpose of teaching that text. Mm.
Is there anything else as we kind of close this session together? Any closing word of clarification, challenge, or encouragement that you would like to leave your fellow colleagues?
I really do think that this isn't easy. We're all coming from different backgrounds where maybe some of the stuff that we need to do is unlearn and relearn and continue to learn. And doing it together, like what I really liked about this scenario is that there are two teachers here and we're a community and we're not alone. And if we have questions, we ask. And if we stumble, we're humble enough to meet it with good criticism. And I think it's important work. This is so important. And I think our students will appreciate us more if we bring it into our classroom.
Anybody else want to offer a final word to challenge, clarify, or encourage?
To piggyback off of Anna, if I may, this is our willingness, wanting to have these conversations in our class is a gift. Too often I've taught a grade 12 class and had discussions about race, and my kids have said this is the first time I've ever spoken about it. And I want to talk about it, but I don't have, my family is not the place I can talk about this. And the cafeteria is not the place I can talk about this. And now I'm 17, 18, and I'm in grade 12, and it's the first chance. And we don't end the class with any answers. We have no answers. We just have discussions where they're able to speak and listen and ask questions. And I say, I don't know, and I'll try and figure that out for you. And we come back tomorrow, and the conversations are really important. And if I may, we're not the experts. None of us are in this. We're all learning. And so just the willingness to learn and learn alongside of our students will help us, and more importantly, truthfully, them as we go through the journey.
I want to just say, to encourage the teachers, that it's a journey. You might not pick it up just the first time, but during that journey, it's just to open up your mind and allow even the students to teach you something new, something maybe you've never experienced, if you've never experienced that before. And maybe go home and reflect and come back, knowing that there's grace, which is so sufficient for all of us, even as we teach the students. At the end, you find it's not as hard as it was in the beginning. So it's a journey. Look at it as it's a journey. And we might not get there because you might not know all the cultures, but you will be having, every year you get the new students, you'll be happy to receive some new information from your own students.
I think, we know that race matters, we know that words matter, and we know that our students matter. And we just have to get behind the why and to do the reflecting, like Nintendo said. That's so important for all of us to really reflect on where we are and where we're going on this journey.